other, and I see no reason why Wells Fargo, as a company from both an investment standpoint and a moral standpoint going forward, is in any way inferior to the other big banks with which it competes. They made a big mistake. It costs. We've still got. We have a large unrealized gain in it, but that doesn't have anything to do with our decision making. But I like it as an investment. I like Tim Sloan as a manager, and he is correcting mistakes made by other people. I tried to correct mistakes at Solomon, and I had terrific help from Derek Maughan as well as a number of the people at Munger Tolles. And that is going to happen. You try to minimize it. Charlie says that an ounce of prevention isn't worth a pound of cure. It's worth about a ton of cure. And we ought to jump on everything. He's pushed me all my life to make sure that I attack unpleasant problems that surface. And that's sometimes not easy to do when everything else is going fine. And at Wells, they clearly, and I don't know exactly what, but they did what people at every organization, it got accentuated to an extreme point. But I see no reason to think that Wells Fargo going forward is other than a very, very large, well-run bank that had an episode in its history it wished it didn't have. But Geico came out stronger. American Express came out stronger. The question is what you do when you find the problems. Charlie?
Well, I agree with that. I think Wells Fargo is going to be better going forward than it would have been if these leaks had never been discovered.
Or happened.
Yeah. So I think but I think Harvey Weinstein has done a lot for improving behavior too.
Yeah.
It was clearly an error, and they're acutely aware of it and acutely embarrassed, and they don't want to have it happen again. No, if I had to say which bank is more likely to behave the best in the future, it might be Wells Fargo, of all of them.
This New York Times that I have here from March 12, 1942, if you go toward the back of it, in the classified section, you have one big section that says help wanted male and another one that says help wanted female. Was the New York Times doing the right thing in those days? I think the New York Times is a terrific paper, but people make mistakes, and the idea of classifying between taking ads and saying, well, we'll take them and divide them up between men and women, what jobs we think are appropriate, or the advertiser thinks appropriate. We do a lot of dumb things in this world, and Geico, as I say, in the early 1970s, they just ignored, and you can do it, the setting of proper reserves, which mean they charged the wrong price to new customers because they thought their losses were less than they were. And I'm sure some of that may have been a desire to please Wall Street, or just because they didn't want to face how things were going. But it came out incredibly stronger, and now it's got 13% of the households in the United States insured, and it came out with an attention to reserves and that sort of thing that was heightened by the difficulties that they'd found themselves in when they almost went bankrupt. 42.
It was a lot more stupid than Wells Fargo. It was really stupid what they did way back, right?
Yeah, they had the world by the tail, and then they quit looking at the reserve development. But it was American Express was just picking up a few dollars by having the field warehousing company in 1963, and they were worried whether it was going to sink the company. And when some guy named Tino DeAngelis in, I think it was Bayonne, New Jersey. In fact, I went to the annual meeting in 1964 of American Express after the scandal developed, and somebody asked if the auditor would step forward, and the auditor from one of the big firms, which I won't mention, came up to the microphone, and somebody said, "How much did we pay you last year?" And the auditor gave this answer, and then the questioner said, "Well, how much extra would you have charged us to go over to Bayonne, which was 10 miles away, and check whether there's any oil in the tanks?" So here was something in a tiny little operation. Some guy was calling in from a bar in Bayonne and telling them the phony stuff was going on, and they didn't want to hear it. They shut their ears to it. And then what emerged was one of the great company after this kind of what they felt was a near-death experience. So we're going to make mistakes. I will guarantee you that we will get some unpleasant news at Berkshire. I don't know what it'll be. The most important thing is we do something about it. And there have been times when I procrastinated, and Charlie has been the one that jabs me into action. And so he's performed a lot of services you don't know about. Okay. Greg Warren.
Good morning, Warren. I have a little bit of a follow-up on Becky's question. At the 2014 annual meeting, as well as this morning, you noted that the power of Berkshire brand and its reputation, as well as the strength of Berkshire's balance sheet, would allow the company's next managers to replicate many of the advantages that have come with your being the face of the organization, one of which has been an ability to extract high rents from firms in exchange for a capital infusion and the Buffett seal of approval during times of financial distress. I buy the argument about the strength of the balance sheet and believe that deals will continue to be done, with sellers still lining up to become part of the Berkshire family, especially if the company's next managers are allowed to keep a ton of cash on hand. But I'm not entirely convinced that they'll be able to garner the same 8, 9, 10% coupons, as well as other add-ons that you've been able to extract from firms like Goldman Sachs and Bank of America in times of distress. I'd expect those rents to be at least a few percentage points lower once you're no longer running the show. That is until those managers build up a reputation to warrant higher returns. Am I right to think about it that way?
I'm not sure. When we, you mentioned Goldman Sachs, when we also did with General Electric in September, early October of 2008, we probably could have actually extracted better terms. I think it might have been counterproductive in the end, but we would have done better, incidentally, financially, if we'd really waited till the panic developed further. Of course, I didn't know how far it would develop, but we could have made a lot better purchases 3 or 4 or 5 months later than we did at that time. And we also did not want to do something that looked to be so high as to make the transaction disadvantageous to Goldman or to GE. They were going to take the terms we offered, but we actually didn't push it to the limit because there really wasn't anybody else around. I think, and we're working on something right now that probably won't happen. It's not huge, but actually in this case, both Todd and Ted have brought deals to me. One of them brought something to me, and he was thinking in the same terms that I was thinking about, and he's the one that returned the call that he had received about a transaction, and I do not think the party on the other side is going to care about the fact that they had him on the phone rather than me on the phone. There could be just a little bit at certain times in history, but we will continue to have our standards of what we think money is worth at any given time, and Ted and Todd think just as well about that as I do, and there will be times, very occasionally, when our phone will ring a lot, and I don't think they'll hang up because I don't answer if they need the money. Charlie?
Well, the times he's referring to, a lot of them were like the worst in 50 years. So that's a really rare kind of an occurrence. And we didn't make all that many deals. So I think he's right that it'll be harder for us to make similar deals in the future.
Yeah, the problem is the sums involved now, more than the problem of deciding what the proper term should be. And sometimes we can get what we think is appropriate, and sometimes most of the time today we can't. But you may see a transaction or two that, not in terms of buying business, but in terms of securities, that strike you as perfectly decent ways to invest Berkshire's money, and they may well have come through Otter Ted instead of directly to me. I like to think I'll be missed a little bit, but you won't notice it. Okay, station 3.
I'm John Lichter from Boulder, Colorado. Mr. Buffett, are you still involved in pricing decisions and the Buffalo News? And with what other Berkshire subsidiaries do you take more than a hands-off approach?
Yeah, you're correct that at one time, and for quite a while, both Charlie and I took part in the pricing decisions at See's Candy, and certainly for some years, particularly when the question of the survival of the Buffalo News was really in question, I definitely took part in those decisions. In both cases, we had good managers, but we still we thought those decisions were important. But it's been a long, long time, very long time, since we've participated in anything like that. I can't tell you what the per pound price is for See's Candy, which is because people, and you're invited to join this group, send me free candy from time to time, and I can't tell you the prices at the Buffalo News, and all I know is it's very, very, very hard to move up prices on advertising generally. So no, the only thing is Ajit and I talk frequently, and if there's some very big risk, if somebody wants a $5 billion cover on a chemical plant some way, excessive loss of over $3 billion or something, we have a certain amount of fun with him deciding on the price in his head, and I decide in my head, and then we compare notes. It's the kind of risk that you really can't look up in a book and see actuarially what it's the parameters are fairly likely to be. I enjoy thinking through the pricing of that, and I particularly enjoy comparing it with Ajit. So these are just oddball situations, but we do that sort of thing, and we've done it for 3 decades, and it's part of the fun of my job. The candy prices, if you got to complain about those, you have to go to Charlie.
Well, the answer is Warren is still doing it in talking to Ajit, but that's because Ajit likes it that way.
Yep.
We have a very peculiar place where Warren's contact with the various people elsewhere in the organization largely depends on what they want, not what he wants.
The CEO of one of our
very unusual, and it's worked beautifully.
the CEO of one of our most successful subsidiaries, I may have talked to, unless I saw him here and just said hello, I probably talked to him 3 times in the last 10 years. And he does remarkably well. He might have done even better if I hadn't talked to him those 3 times. And on the other hand, Ajit and I talk very, very frequently, and he's got the kind of business. I know more about the insurance business. I know about a good many of the other business, and it's interesting. And we are evaluating things that you don't look up in a book. I mean, actuarial talent is not what's important in the things that Ajit talks to me about. It's plenty important throughout our insurance operation, but in these particular cases, we're making judgments, and his judgment's better than mine. But I just like to hear about them. They're interesting propositions. Okay, Carol.
This question comes from a Berkshire shareholder named Jack Sozowski. He's a well-known accounting expert who for many years has written the Accounting Observer. Mr. Buffett, in this year's shareholder letter, you have harsh words for the new accounting rule that requires companies to use market values. For analytical purposes, you said, Berkshire's bottom line will be useless. I'd like to argue with you about that. Shouldn't a company's earnings report say everything that happened to and within a company during an accounting period? Shouldn't the income statement be like an objectively written newspaper informing shareholders of what happened under the management for that period, showing what management did to increase shareholder value and how outside forces may have affected the firm? If securities increased in value, surely the company and the shareholders are better off. And surely they're worse off if securities decreased in value. Those changes are most certainly real. In my opinion, ignoring changes in the way that some companies ignore restructuring costs is censoring the shareholders' newspaper. So my question is, how would you answer what I say?
Well, my answer to the question asked what my answer would be to what he said. I would ask Jack, if we've got $170 billion of partly owned companies, which we intend to own for decades, and which we expect to become worth more money over time, and where we reflect the market value in our balance sheet, does it make sense to every quarter mark those up and down through the income account, when at the same time we own businesses that have become worth far more money in most cases, and become, since we bought, you name the company, just take Geico, an extreme case. We bought half the company for $50 million roughly. Do we want to be marking that up every quarter to the value and having it run through the income account? That becomes an appraisal process. There's nothing wrong with doing that in terms of evaluation, but in terms of a value, and you can call it gain in net asset value or loss in net asset value. That's what a closed-end investment fund or an open-end investment fund would do. But to run that through an income account, if I looked at our 60 or 70 businesses or whatever number there might be, and every quarter we marked those to market, we would have obviously a great many, in certain cases where over time we'd have them at 10 times what we paid. But how quarter by quarter we should mark those up and run it through the income account, where 99% of investors probably look at net income as being meaningful in terms of what has been produced from operations during the year, I think would be, well, I can say it would be enormously deceptive. I mean, in the first quarter of this year, you saw the figures earlier where we had the best, what I would call operating earnings in our history, and our securities were down $6 billion or whatever it was. to keep running that through the income account every day, you would say that we might have made on Friday, we probably made $2.5 billion. Well, if you have investors and commentators and analysts and everybody else working off those net income numbers and trying to project earnings for quarters and earnings for future years to the penny, I think you're doing a great disservice by running those through the income account. I think it's fine to have marketable securities on the balance sheet, the information available is to their market value, but we have businesses there. We never would do it, but if we were to sell half, we'll say, of the BNSF Railroad, we would receive more than we carried for, and we could turn it into a marketable security, and it would look like we made a ton of money overnight. Or if we were to appraise it every 3 months and write it up and down, it could lead to all kinds of manipulation, but B, it would just lead to any investor being totally confused. I don't want to receive data in that manner, and therefore I don't want to send it out in that manner. Charlie?
Well, to me, it's obvious that the change in valuation should be noted, and it is and always has been, goes right into the net worth figures. So the questioner doesn't understand his own profession. I'm not supposed to talk that way, but it slips out once in a while.
Sometimes he even gives it a push. Okay, Jonathan.
McLane's core operating margins have dropped about 50% from where they've generally been since acquisition. Could you elaborate on the competitive pressures in the grocery and convenience store distribution business that have caused the deterioration in profits? And do you expect the margin structure of that business to eventually get back to where it was, or is this the new normal?
Well, I don't know the answer to the second part about the future, but there's no question that the margins have been squeezed. They were very, very narrow. As you know, they were about 1 cent on the dollar pre-tax, and they've been squeezed from that. Payment terms get squeezed, and in some cases we have fairly long-term contracts on that, so it'll go on for 5 years at one, and then it's a very, very tight margin business. And the situation's even worse than you portray, because within McLane we have a liquor distribution business in a few states, and that business has actually increased its earnings moderately, and we've added to that business. So within McLane's figures are about 70 million or so pre-tax from the liquor part that have nothing to do with the massive parts you're talking about in terms of food distribution. So the decline is even greater in what you're referring to than you've noticed, and that's just become very, very much more competitive, and we have to decide. You'll look at our competitors, and they're not making much money either, and that's capitalism. I think there comes a point where the customer says, I'll only pay X, and you have to walk away, and there's a great temptation when you're particularly employing thousands of people, and you build distribution facilities and all of that sort of thing, take care of them, to meet what you'd like to term as irrational competition. But that is capitalism, and you're right. The earnings went up quite a bit from the time we bought it, and we're still earning more than then, and we've earned a lot of money over time. But as they say, a fair amount of that is actually coming from liquor distribution and activities in about 4 states that we purchase, very well run, and we will do our best to get the margins up. But I could not give you a really your guess is almost as good as mine, or better than mine maybe, as to what margins will be in that distribution business 5 years from now. It's a very essential service. We do 40-some billion, and we move more of the product of all kinds of companies that names are known to you than anybody else. But when you get Kraft Heinz, for that matter, or Philip Morris, or whomever it may be, on one side of the deal, and you get Walmart and some other 7-Eleven on the other side of the deal, sometimes they don't leave you very much room in between. Charlie?
I think you've described it very well.
Okay. Station 4.
Good morning, Charlie and Warren. I know that seems a little bit out of order, but I'm a huge fan of yours, Charlie, mostly for your 25 cognitive biases. I'm from Seattle, Washington. I run a one-person digital marketing firm that specializes in Facebook ads and email marketing. I use these a lot. Your breakdown of Coca-Cola was really, really solid, and I use that as reference when looking to how to understand the mechanics of my clients' products and how to promote them. So I'm fairly certain that your cognitive biases work for internet-related companies. Now that you're partnering with Amazon on healthcare, I'm curious, have you started to understand how to apply these biases to internet-related companies? Or is there another set of tools you use to decide if you understand a business? Because you guys talk a lot about not investing in businesses that you don't understand.
Well, healthcare we don't plan to start healthcare companies or necessarily insurers or anything. We simply have 3 organizations with leaders that I admire and trust, and that mutually goes around all 3. And we hope to do something which Charlie correctly would probably say is almost impossible, to change in some way a system which was taking 5% of GDP in 1960, and now it's taking close to 18%. And we have a hugely non-competitive medical cost in American business relating to any country in the world. The countries there were some countries that were around our 5% when we were at 5%, but we managed to get to 18 without them going beyond 11 or so. Literally in 1960, we were spending $170 per capita on medical costs in the United States, and now we're spending over $10,000. And every dollar only has 100 cents. So there is a cost problem. It is a tapeworm in terms of American business and in its competitiveness. We have fewer doctors per capita. We have fewer hospital beds per capita, fewer nurses per capita than some of the other countries that are well below us. And you've got a system that is delivering $3.3 trillion. That's almost as much as the federal government raises. It's delivering $3.3 trillion or some number like that to millions and millions and millions of people who are involved in the system, and every dollar has a constituency. It's just like politics. And whether we can find the chief executive, which we're working on now, and which I would expect we would be able to announce before too long. But that's a key part of it, and whether that person will have the imagination and support of people that will enable us to make any kinds of significant improvements in a system which everybody agrees is sort of out of control on cost, but they all think it's the other guy's fault generally. We'll find out. It won't be easy, but it is not the motivations are not primarily profit making. We want to deliver. We want our employees to get better medical service at a lower cost. We're certainly not going to come up with something where we think the service that they receive is inferior to what they're getting now. But we do think that there may be ways to make some significant changes that could have an effect, and we know that the resistance will be unbelievable. And if we fail, we've at least tried. But the idea is not that I will be able to contribute anything to, in some breakthrough moment by reading a few medical journals or something, changing something that is embedded as the medical system. But the idea is maybe the three organizations which employ over 1 million people and which, after we announced it, we had a flood of calls from people who wanted to join in, but there isn't anything to join into now. But they will if we have come up with any ideas that are useful. Whether we can bring the resources, bring the person, and the CEO is terribly important, and bring the person, support that person, and somehow figure out a better way for people to continue to receive better medical care in the United States without that 18% going to 20 or 22%, in the lifetime of, our children or something of the sort, because there are only 100 cents in the dollar, and we will see what happens. It's, if you were a Jeet actuarially figuring, you would not bet on us, but I think there is some chance we will do something. There's a chance, nobody can quantify it, that we can do something significant, and we are positioned better than most people to try, and we've certainly got the right partners, so we will give it a shot and see what happens. Charlie?
There is some precedent for success in this public service activity. If you go back many decades, John D. Rockefeller I, using his own money, made an enormous improvement in American medical care. Perfectly enormous. In fact, there's never been any similar improvement done by any one man since that marvels it. So Warren, having imitated Rockefeller in one way, is just trying another, and maybe it'll work.
Rockefeller incidentally lived a very long time, so I'm trying to imitate him 3 ways there. We'll see what happens, but we're making a lot of progress, and I think we'll probably have a CEO within a couple of months. But if we don't have one, we're not going to pick somebody just because we want to meet any deadline or anything like that. We've got these wonderful partners. We don't have a partnership agreement among us. Somebody started drawing up one in the legal department, and the CEO just put a stop to it. I mean, you do have places that have a lot of resources, and while we all have our share of bureaucracy, we can cut through it if we've got something that we really think makes sense. And we will get the support. We'll get a lot of resistance too, but we will get the support of a lot of American business if we can come up with something that makes sense. But if it was easy, it would have already been done. There's no question about that.
It's not easy.
No. But it should be tried. Okay. Becky?
This question comes from David Rolfe, who is with Wedgwood Partners and has been, the company has been shareholders in Berkshire since 1989. The stock is currently the largest holding in their stocks, 18 stocks. He asks this question. Over the past 2 years, you have listed the individual fund-to-funds performance from protege partners. When will you start showing the annual performance on $25 billion that Ted and Todd manage? Can you state if either Ted or Todd has beaten the S&P 500 index over the last 5 years?
Yeah. Both. We'll probably never report their individual performance. But you can be sure that I have an enormous interest in, as does Charlie, in how much we think they contribute to Berkshire, and they've been terrific. They not only have the intellect and the record, but they are exceptional human beings. And Todd has done a tremendous amount of work, for example, on the medical project, and Ted is. I've given him several things, and he's done them better than I can do them. So the record since inception, and I'm measuring it. Ted came later than Todd, a year or so later. But the record since inception is almost identical, both for the two managers from their different inceptions, and matching the S&P. And they've received some incentive compensation, which they only get if they beat the S&P. And as I say, they're just slightly ahead. That really hasn't. It's been better than I've done, so naturally I can't criticize it. They were two very, very, very good choices. Charlie?
You did report it in a previous year. You just didn't do it this year. But now you have your report.
Well, yeah. Well, I would. The problem that all of us has is size. It's harder to run even $12 or $13 billion, frankly, than it is to run $1 billion. And if you're running $1 million or something of the sort, it's a whole different game. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you, Charlie?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. Just like any good lawyer, you never ask them a question unless you think you know the answer they're going to give. Okay, Gary.
My question's on Geico. Last year you promised growth and delivered. But along the way, the combined ratio was moving up, and it was the first time it was over 100 in about 15 years. Granted, some of that was catastrophes, but even excluding catastrophes, there was something going on in the loss trends that caused you to slow down that growth, at least as we got to the latter part of the year. And I wondered if you could tell us what was going on. And I did look this morning, too, so it looked like the first quarter settled down a little bit, but I'd still like to know about the fourth quarter.
Yeah, sure. The only thing I differ with the question on slightly, when you say it caused us to slow down, we didn't want to slow down the growth. I mean, you're looking at a guy here that has never wanted to slow down the growth at Geico. The growth did slow down, but it wasn't because we wanted it to. Our prices that led to the underwriting loss, we'd have been slightly in the black without the catastrophes, but if we hadn't have paid our light bills, we might have been in the black too. I mean, this except for stuff doesn't mean much in insurance, as far as I'm concerned. If you look at the first quarter, our margins were around 7%, which is actually a little more than we aimed for. And I've received the the preliminary figures for April, and they're similar. So the underwriting gain or margins are perfectly satisfactory now, and we'd love to get all the growth we can, and we will gain market share this year, and we gain market share. When Tony took over the place, in 1993, it was 2 and a very small fraction percent, and it'll be 13% of the 13% of the households in the country now, and we will keep gaining share. We will keep writing profitably most of the time, and every now and then our rates will be slightly inaccurate, modestly inaccurate, and inadequate, I should say, or we'll have maybe some big losses on hurricanes or something of the sort. or we'll have a Sandy in New York. But Geico is a jewel, and it's really our. We've got some others we feel awfully close to similarly about, but it's an incredible company. It has a culture all of its own. It's saving its customers probably $4 or $5 billion a year against what they would otherwise be paying based on the average in auto insurance, and it will be profitable on underwriting a very high percentage of the year. It contributed another $2 billion to float last year. It is a terrific company, and like I say, the first 4 months are dramatically better. Now, there's some seasonal in auto insurance, so the first quarter is usually the best of the 4 quarters, but it's not a dramatic seasonal. So I think when you read the 10Q, and you can take my word for April, I think Geico is on a good profit track as well as a good growth track, and the more it grows, the better I like it. Charlie?
Well, I think you've said it perfectly.
Huh.
It was never very bad, and it's better now.
Okay, station 5.
Good morning, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. My name is Ethan Raposa, and I am from Omaha, Nebraska. My question is, how will Donald Trump's tariffs affect the manufacturing business of Berkshire Hathaway?
Well, to date, steel costs we've seen steel costs increase somewhat, but as I said earlier, I don't think the United States or China. There'll be some jockeying back and forth, and there'll be something that leaves some people unhappy. But I don't think either country will dig themselves into something that precipitates and continues any kind of real trade war in this country. We've had that in the past a few times, and I think we've learned a general lesson on it. But there will be some things about our trade policies that irritate others, and there'll be some from others that irritate us, and there'll be some back and forth. But in the end, I don't think we'll come out with a terrible answer on it. Charlie, I'll let you.
Well, steel the conditions in steel were almost unbelievably adverse to the American steel industry. You know, even Donald Trump can be right on some of this stuff.
The thing about trade, I've always said that the president, whether it's any president, needs to be an educator in chief, which Roosevelt was in the Depression. That's why he had those fireside chats, and it was very important that he communicated to the people what needed to be done and how, and what was happening around them. And trade is particularly difficult because the benefits of trade are basically not visible. You don't know what you would be paying for the clothes you're wearing today if we'd had a rule they all had to be manufactured in the United States, or what you'd be paying for your television set or whatever it may be. No one thinks about the benefits day by day as they walk around buying things and carrying on their own business. The negatives, and there are negatives, are very apparent and very painful. And if you're laid off, like happened in our shoe business in Maine, and you been a very, very, very good worker, and you are proud of what you did, and maybe your parents did it before you, and all of a sudden you find out that American shoes manufactured in America, are not competitive with shoes made outside the United States. You can talk all you know about Adam Smith or David Ricardo or something and explain the benefits of free trade and comparative advantage and all that sort of thing. And that doesn't make any difference. And if you're 55 or 60 years old, to talk about retraining or something like that, so what? It is tough in politics where you have a hidden benefit and a very visible cost to a certain percentage of your constituency. And you need to do two things under those circumstances. If you have that situation, you know what's good for the country. So you have to be very good at explaining how it does really hurt in a real way somebody that works in a textile mill like we had in New Bedford, where you only spoke Portuguese, half our workers only spoke Portuguese, and suddenly they have no job, and they've been doing their job well for years. You've got to do two things. You have to understand that that's the price individuals pay for what's good for the collective good, and secondly, you got to take care of the people that where retraining is a joke because of their age or whatever it may be, and you've got to take care of the people that become the roadkill in something that is collectively good for us as a country. And that takes society acting through its representatives to develop the policies that will get us the right collective result and not kill too many people economically in the process. And we've done that in various arenas over the years. The people in their productive years do help take care of the people that are too old and too young. I mean, every time a baby is born in the United States, we take on an obligation of educating them for 12 years. It'll cost $150,000 now. We have a system that has a bond between the people in their productive years and the ones in the young and old, and it gets better over time. Far from perfect now, but it has gotten better over time, and I believe that trade properly explained and with policies that take care of the people that are roadkill is good for our country and can be explained. But I think it's been a tough sell to a guy that made shoes in Dexter, Maine, or worked on a loom in New Bedford, Mass, or works in a steel mill in Youngstown, Ohio. So. Andrew?
Okay, Warren, this question comes from a Berkshire shareholder who says they've been a shareholder for 10 years. I should say this may be one of the most pointed questions I've ever received for you.
But you've elected to give it, though, anyway.
But I did. The shareholder writes, I have watched the movie every year at this meeting when you testify in front of Congress on behalf of Solomon as the symbol of what it means to have a moral compass. Investors are increasingly looking to invest in companies that are socially and morally responsible. So I was disturbed when you were asked on CNBC about the role that business could play in sensible policies around the sales of guns. You said you didn't think business should have a role at all, and you wouldn't impose your values on others. I was even more surprised when you said you'd be okay with Berkshire owning shares in gun manufacturers. At this meeting years ago, you said you wouldn't buy a tobacco company because of the social issues. The idea that Berkshire would associate with any company as long as it isn't illegal seems at odds with everything I think you stand for. Please tell us you misspoke.
Well, let's explore that a little. Should it be just my view, or should it be the view of the owners of the company? So if I decide to poll the owners of the company on a variety of political issues, and one of them being whether Berkshire Hathaway should support the NRA. I know if a majority of the shareholders voted to do it, or if a majority of the board of directors voted to do it, I wouldn't accept that. I don't think that my political views, I don't think I put them in a blind trust at all when I take the job. And in the election of 2016, I raised a lot of money. In my case, I raised it for Hillary, and I spoke out in various ways that were quite frank. But I don't think that I speak. When I do that, I don't think I'm speaking for Berkshire. I'm speaking as a private citizen, and I don't think I have any business speaking for Berkshire. We have never, at the parent company level, we have never made a political contribution. I may go, and I don't go to our suppliers. I don't do anything of that sort where I raise money either for the school I went to or for a political candidate I went to or anything else. And I don't think that we should have a question on the GEICO policyholder form. Are you an NRA member? And if you are, you just aren't good enough for us or something. That I think I do not believe in imposing my political opinions on the activities of our businesses. And if you get to what companies are pure and which ones aren't pure, I think it is very difficult to make that call. I think with that response, I'm almost afraid to call on Charlie, but go ahead, Charlie.
Well, obviously, you do draw a limit, Warren.
Yeah, we
all
did.
All kinds of things,
yeah,
which are beneath us, even though they're legal. But we don't necessarily draw it perfectly because we've got some sort of supreme knowledge. We just do the best we can. And certainly we're not going to ban all guns surrounded by wild turkeys in Omaha.
Okay, Greg.
Warren, this question is also based on something you said more recently, so I can't guarantee it's going to be any easier. You recently noted that you prefer share repurchases over dividends as a means for returning capital to shareholders should Berkshire's cash balances continue to rise and hit the $150 billion threshold you noted as being difficult to defend to shareholders at last year's annual meeting. While I understand the rationale for not establishing a regular dividend, a one-time special dividend could be a useful option for returning a larger chunk of Berkshire's excess capital to shareholders without the implied promise to keep paying a regular dividend forever. The drawback with the special dividend, though, is that it would lead to an immediate decline in book value and book value per share, whereas a larger share repurchase effort, while depressing book value, would reduce Berkshire's share count, limiting the impact on book value per share. If we do happen to get a few years out and Berkshire does hit that $150 billion threshold because valuations continue to be too high, both for acquisitions and for the repurchase of company stock, would you consider a one-time special dividend as a means for returning capital to shareholders?
Well, if we thought we couldn't use capital effectively, we would try to figure out the most effective way of returning capital to shareholders. And you could, I would have probably, I think it'd be unlikely we'd do it by a special